There are a lot of things that scare me. Food poisoning, cancer, taxes. One thing that's a bit more logical and hopefully won't happen is being sent to prison. I mean, look at me. I would be like the unsuccessful version of Andy Dufresne, and there's no Morgan Freeman in prison. So today, that got me thinking, what about writers that were sent to prison? There are many works of literature that were written in prison and just by prisoners. Some of the works are autobiographical in nature and deal with the treatment and environment they found themselves in while in prison, and others take on a more fictional approach. So, come along with me today as I go from Russian labor camps in Siberia to the penitentiaries of modern America. Let's talk about some literature. If you like literature, reading, as well as obscure topics, consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more videos like this. I appreciate every subscriber I get, and I try to improve my channel with every video I make. With that said, thank you, and let's move on with the video. I thought I'd kick off this list with probably one of the most well-known novelists of all time next to Charles Dickens and Stephen King, Fyodor Dostoevsky. After the success of his first novel, Poor People, Dostoevsky would find himself in the middle of a Russian literary group called the Petrosheyev Circle. This circle would gather to talk about politics, philosophy, literature, and one thing they also talked about was their sort of problems they had with the then Tsar aristocracy of Russia. And the Tsar aristocracy did not like the fact that they were critiquing them, even in secret. So, Dostoevsky and the rest of the group were sentenced to death by firing squad. Just as Dostoevsky and the rest of the group were led to what would be their death, just mere moments, their sentence would be changed, and Dostoevsky would be made to serve reprieve in a Siberian labor camp. This moment would have a strong effect on Dostoevsky, confronting his own mortality, as well as the rest of the group, two of which went clinically insane after this incident. After arriving to the prison, Dostoevsky would have trouble adjusting to his situation. While on the outside, he had been treated as an intellectual and he was sort of a famous novelist at the time. Inside, he was treated as nothing more than the common criminal. This was also the first time Dostoevsky would be away from people of more educated and literary conventions and being around more people of the everyday. He would remain there from 1850 to 1854 and would later describe this event as one of the most traumatic as well as the most influential periods throughout his whole life. While there, he would write of his experiences on scraps of paper that would later be turned into Notes from the House of the Dead, or, as it's also translated, Notes from a Dead House, a semi-autobiographical work by him. The novel would follow a man by the name of Alexander Goryanchikov, who is sentenced to a Siberian prison labor camp for 10 years after killing his wife. While the novel lacks a sort of traditional plot structure, it instead marks Alexander's observations and experiences he has with the people and their current situation. The novel is an interesting look at Siberian prison camps at the time, as well as how people deal with absurd and, well, seemingly meaningless situations such as being in prison in Siberia. I mean, geez, it's terrible. It's certainly not the most famous of Dostoevsky's novels, but one I think most literary fans could appreciate. Before I talk about the book and writer for this one, I need to set some context for the scene. In June of 1892, a union strike between Carnegie Steel, this is such a long name, but I'm going to have to read this from the script, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers at Carnegie Steel in Homestead, Pennsylvania, would erupt in a 12-hour gunfight between the union strikers and the Pinkerton Agency. It all began when a 3-year contract between Carnegie Steel and the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, what a name, jeez, would end. And because of this, there would be pay cuts for many of the workers. Along with this, he would also decline to negotiate with the union, offering no reprieve for the workers whose pay is being cut. On top of that, he would also lock down the Homestead plant, locking 3,000 people out of their jobs. Though a majority of these were not part of the union, they went along and just striked with the union regardless. Andrew Carnegie, who was pro-union and pro-striking, would privately write to Henry Frick that he wants the strike settled by any means necessary. After shutting the doors to the plant, Frick would also attach barbed wire all around the plant, which would then coincide with the union strikers arming themselves and centering themselves around the town. Now, Frick had already planned on hiring strike breakers, but now, since the union strikers were armed, he would then have to hire people to break up any fights that may happen with the strike breakers. So he hired the Pinkerton Agency, which are very infamous for breaking up strikes around this time and very violent. 300 Pinkertons would arrive on river by tugboat to the plant, and they were armed to the teeth. Now, the Union strikers were not armed to the teeth, and they were not professionals. They were armed with ancient rifles and a 12-ton cannon. Sorry, a 20-pound cannon. That is a lot different. 12-ton cannon. The fight would go on for 12 hours, and with 12 factory workers dead, as well as many factory guards dead. Now, this is where our writer comes in. Though they had nothing to do with the actual Union strikers, this trio of anarchists would be following the story through the news. Emma Goldman, Modest Arenstam, and the writer we're going to be talking about, Alexander Berkman. After hearing about the 12 workers that were murdered by the Pinkertons, they decided this was enough and they needed to put their principles into action, looking to stoke the fires that were already set with the Homestead strike. Berkman and the other 2 anarchists had decided to assassinate Henry Frick.
You frickin' Fricks just can't ever be quenched. Your fantasies can't ever be quenched, can they? You frickin' Fricks! When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
On July 23rd, 1892, Berkman would walk into the office of Carnegie Steel armed with a .32 caliber handgun and a knife. After assassinating Henry Frick, Berkman was to kill himself. At least that was the plan anyways. After Berkman was to kill himself, Emma Goldman would explain his actions to the wider American public, hoping to unite them, inspiring them to go against the oppressive upper class. Though Berkman would fail. And because of this, most people just assumed he was a random, crazy guy, and even the Union strikers had no clue why he was wanting to kill Henry Frick. Like they misconstrued his motives. They just thought he was a crazy guy without a plan. And due to this failed assassination attempt, Berkman would be sentenced to 20 years in prison, of which he would serve 14. The prison memoirs that Berkman would write would be separated in multiple parts. The first part being the planned assassination and all the way up to when he tries to kill Frick. Frick, I began. The look of terror on his face strikes me speechless. It is the dread of conscious presence of death. He understands. It flashes through my mind. With a quick motion, I draw the revolver. As I raise the weapon, I see Frick clutch with both hands the arm of the chair and attempt to rise. I aim at his head. Perhaps he wears armor, I reflect. With a look of horror, he quickly averts his face as I pull the trigger. To the later part of the memoirs being about Berkman's release from prison and how he's adjusting to that. My engagement in Pittsburgh aids my determination. Little did I dream in the penitentiary that I should live to see that city again, even to appear in public there. Looking back over the long years of imprisonment, of persecution and torture, I marvel that I have survived. Surely it was not alone physical capacity to suffer. How often had I touched the threshold of death, and trembled on the brink of insanity and self-destruction. Whatever strength and perseverance I possessed, they alone could not have saved my reason in the night of the dungeon or preserved me in the despair of the solitary. In between this, Berkman reflects on himself, and in the beginning, his idealism slips away as he adjusts to the people he's serving with, who he detests. He recognizes the system that made them what they are. He finds that he has nothing in common with them and can't really be friends with them. Other than that, the book touches on themes of humanity, homosexuality, class, and of course, politics. It's a work that I think is quite relevant in today's political climate, and one that I think any fan of politics or history should read. Born into a black middle-class family in the early 1900s, Chester B. Himes would spend much of his early life in educational institutions. His father was a professor who taught blacksmithing, horseshoeing, and history, and his mother was a piano teacher. Though their educational background, this didn't stop the family from falling on hard times and often having to seek the help of other family members, to the annoyance of Chester's mother. They would stay with many family members until they would find themselves relocating to Columbus, Ohio. After high school, Himes would stay in Ohio and then attend Ohio State University until he was kicked out for performing a prank. After being kicked out of Ohio State, Himes would do something that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Working in illegal gambling dens and performing random bouts of robberies, Himes would finally be caught at age 19 after trying to pawn stolen jewelry he had stolen. Just 19, Himes would be sentenced to the maximum sentence of 25 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary, of which he would serve 8. While serving time, he would read as many books as he could and write as many short stories as he could, believing it helped him stay out of the prison life and prison violence, as well as earning him respect from fellow prisoners and guards. He would publish his first stories in magazines like The Bronzeman in 1931 and Esquire in 1934. These stories would often center around prisoners and prison life. One, titled To What Red Hell, which dealt with the Ohio State prison fire, of which Himes was a witness to and survivor. Being released in 1936 on parole, he would work odd part-time jobs while focusing on his writing craft until he met fellow writer Langston Hughes, who would help widen his literary prospects and show himself to the literary world. Himes would publish many novels throughout his career, such as The Blind Man with a Pistol, If He Hollers, Let Go, and the most famous of these, Cotton Comes to Harlem, which was adapted into a 1970 film of the same name.
Two cops only a mother could love. Meet Coffin Ed Johnson and Gravedigger Jones, two of New York's finest. Two cops who take charge when an $87,000 bale of cotton comes to Harlem.
The sixth in Himes' Harlem detective novels, Cotton Comes to Harlem is a hard-boiled detective story layered with themes of race and politics while showcasing Harlem culture in the 60s. Before we move on to the final book on this list, I would just like to give a shout out to PEN America's Prison and Justice Writing Program. The program publishes, advertises, and gives resources for creative writers who are incarcerated. It's an interesting program and one that I don't think as many people know or even think about, so you should check out some of the works published through them. They have an anthology published every year with writing from prisoners all across the U.S. The last one on this list is Arthur Longworth's novel, Zek, an American prison story. Arthur Longworth would spend much of his childhood living on the streets and being homeless, as well as living in some of the worst foster homes in Washington state. Before being taken in as a ward of the state, Longworth would spend much of his childhood living homeless on the streets of Portland and Seattle. There's one story even that he stayed in an abandoned trade yard for a while. He would survive by panhandling, stealing from vending machines, and general shoplifting, until eventually he was taken into the foster care system. He would be shuffled between receiving homes for the next 3 years, even ending up in one that the Seattle Times dubbed the House of Horrors. The occupants would later sue Washington State over due to years of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse by their foster care providers. By the age of 16, Longworth would again be on the streets, without any employment history, family, or even more than a 7th grade education. By the age of 20, after being arrested every year in between 16 and 20, he would once again be arrested for armed robbery and murder when he stabbed a woman by the name of Sydney Nelson, 25, outside of an IHOP. Longworth would be sentenced to life without parole. While inside, though, Longworth would learn 2 languages, start a support group for prisoners that had been raised in foster care, and even learn to express himself through creative writing. Quote, "When I was sent to prison, I had only a 7th grade education and didn't read or write very well. I wanted to go to school and get an education, which is something that was not available to me before I came to prison, but I soon discovered that I wasn't allowed to attend school inside either. Prison officials said it would be a waste of their time and resources to educate me because I had a life sentence. At this point, I didn't know if it was possible for me to learn, if I had the same abilities as others, but I had to make up my mind to try, so I set out to educate myself. I went to the prison library and began to check out books. It was a small library and poorly stocked, but I read everything I could. Biography, history, philosophy, and language." End quote. He published a novel, Zek, an American Prison Story, that would focus on one day in the life of a prison inmate by the name of Johnny, who was sent to the hole, or as it's also called, solitary. While he's in there, he chances upon a book, worn and torn. At first, he intended to savor it, reading it one piece at a time, until he eventually finishes it a few hours later and emerges from the hole a changed man. It's a fascinating and interesting work that lays bare the brutalities of prison life by a man who actually lived it. After years of legal battles, a judge would overturn the original ruling in the year of 2022, and Arthur Longworth would be released at the age of 57. Sydney Nelson's family were strongly against this, and I can't really blame them. They lost a family member. And Sydney Nelson's sister would actually speak out and say that Sydney only lived to be 25, while Arthur got to do many of the things that Sydney never got to do while in a prison cell. It's difficult to state their suffering, and I'm unsure if it's my place to say if I think Longworth had bettered himself in prison, but in the eyes of the law, he has. But if I am going to state one personal thing, I would like to say that if there isn't a chance for redemption in the world, then I think most of us would have too much to answer for. That's all we have for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you want to. If you enjoyed the video, it'd mean a lot. I'd appreciate it a lot. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers. I think that's amazing. I never thought I would even get to 1,000. So I never really thought anybody would watch any of my videos, and I remember just being surprised that I had 1,000 views on one video, and I hope I can, get more, as time goes on. But thank you for watching. I have some other videos planned. I just kind of got sidetracked, and I'm having to start on certain videos later than I would have liked. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.